we've got to think about how we're going to get millions of jobs, not a few hundred or a few thousand, but millions of jobs. We're saying that the right figure to think about in terms of South Africa's crisis is the expanded figure of 10.3 million and rising every day.
You're right, unemployment is moving in the wrong direction. Poverty's up. Over 30 million South Africans live in poverty, 9.3 million unemployed.
So we're looking at about 7 million youth that are out of employment, because the bulk of our youth are actually sitting without a matric or just a matric certificate, and the bulk of those have no matric. So if you look at Gauteng and you look at Western Cape, those are the lower unemployment rates nationally. You go to Limpopo, you go to the Eastern Cape, we're sitting over 44%. But when we look at economic growth rates, we're talking about growth rates in excess of 5% before we start creating jobs.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says youth unemployment is at the top of government's agenda. According to the Spectator Index, South Africa has the highest youth unemployment rate in the world. The index says 6.2 million South Africans between the ages of 15 and 24 are unemployed. We're now joined by the AU Youth Advisory Council's Dr. Shakira Chunara.
And I've been following the Youth Employment Service, so that President Cyril Ramaphosa implemented last year, right? And there's a couple of thoughts that I have on that. It's about moving beyond the traditional internship programs, and how do you actually start to employ more young people. You start to see that you have an overall picture of what youth employment is, right? But it doesn't look at the cycle of youth unemployment. And basically an apprenticeship is a one-off initiative. What happens after that? And how do you retain young people within the workforce, or even push the workforce further? So there has to be more thinking around that.
Well, South Africa's unemployment rate has reached an all-time high of just over 30%, and by the expanded definition, it sits at 39.7%. That's with close to 40,000 people having lost their jobs in the first quarter, and approximately 8.5 million youths without employment. About 2 years ago, President Ramaphosa launched the Youth Unemployment Service with the promise to ramp up employment. It means that the trough hasn't even been hit yet, given the COVID-19 effects that took hold post the March month.
We're anticipating quite a hit on youth. Reason being that most people that are able to move to digital work are highly skilled people or more skilled people, whereas a lot of our youth are in entry-level jobs in tourism, in hospitality, and those were the industries that were hit hardest. So we are looking at large numbers of youth who are going to be searching for employment, and given the number of small businesses that seem to be on their knees or who have already closed, we don't see those opportunities opening up in the near future. And how well those business rescue packages actually work to help some of those small businesses survive. Yeah. But that is the most likely place for employment for young people, and that does seem to be decimated. Absolutely. I think government's going to have to really pull something out of the hat to convince companies to continue to employ. I do think everybody needs to hit a reset button, see this as a portal to make better business decisions. And a good business decision is one for the common good. If society is not stepping forward to employ people, we will not get out of this rut.
According to the Centre of Development and Enterprise Government must start focusing on the catalytic changes required to produce faster growing and targeted interventions, and the expansion of public works opportunities, that is. Yeah, so now we sit with a situation where we could ask the question, have we been focusing in the wrong places?
But unless we are getting a much faster growing economy and a much more labor intensive economy, we're not going to make the impact that has any real significance. And it's way past time that we took this issue with the seriousness that it deserves. It's a national catastrophe, really, for all these young people and who have no future in our society.
One of the most important reasons for the high unemployment rate in South Africa is the concentration of economic power in the hands of government, big businesses and strong organized labor. And small businesses do not play the role that they should be playing, as they play in many other countries, to be the major source of job creation in the country.
Executive Director at CDE, Anne Bernstein, discusses their latest report titled 10 Million and Rising, What It Would Take to Address South Africa's Jobs Bloodbath.
Unless we have much faster growth, South Africa will not get more and more jobs. But even if we got faster growth, the nature of the South African economy and the policy choices government has made means that we get fewer and fewer unskilled jobs. Well, in the last decade, we've gone from 6.5 million people who are unemployed to 10.3 million today and rising. This is a devastating number. And in the last decade, what we've done is we've had job summits, we've had presidential summits, we've had projects that people talk about and all sorts of special initiatives. But we've avoided the root causes of why we have such high unemployment, probably the deepest in the world. In fact, we have almost no growth now. The South African Reserve Bank has had to reduce downwards its estimated growth for the last 5 years. Avoiding reform is the wrong approach, and that is partly what has got us into this very difficult situation. We can't fix it overnight, but we can design a strategy for reform and the politics of reform. We have to redefine the notion of worker in South Africa to also include millions of unemployed people who want to be workers. And we need to calibrate the reforms of the labor market so that we don't undermine the benefits and wages of people who've just got out of poverty and who are unionized workers, but we have to find ways to open things up to people who don't have jobs, to get in at the bottom rungs of the economy and to then go up. What happens when you have larger and larger numbers of people who are unemployed is that employed people, the family, the community, has to help them. So it makes it harder for people with jobs to move into the middle class, to be self-standing, because their younger brothers and sisters and cousins and others you have to support, and society has to support. So we've got to look at what are the real costs of all these millions of people who are unemployed, to the individual, to the family, to the household, to the community, to our society. We also have to understand that the longer you stay out of employment, the harder it is. So you get a job and you learn new skills. You've got know-how now of how to operate in your working environment. You get new networks, you learn new skills, and you can take them to your next job if you want to move. Now, I'm unemployed. Firstly, I don't have a job, and secondly, I'm not getting the know-how, the networks, the discipline of work, all the things employed people get. I'm not getting any of those things. And then my skills deteriorate. You know, if you don't use them, you don't move forward, so it gets worse and worse. So we have to understand that employment helps create employability, and unemployment, a multi-generational crisis of unemployment, disadvantages, excludes the unemployed more and more and more as time goes on. And that's why CDE is saying we have to do something. We have to get people into the labor force. We're saying you've got to think differently about all of this. Otherwise, we just carry on doing what we're doing. And we have another job summit when not very much happens. We've got to think about how we're going to get millions of jobs. Not a few hundred or a few thousand, but millions of jobs. We're saying that the right figure to think about in terms of South Africa's crisis is the expanded figure of 10.3 million and rising every day.
Yes, guaranteeing paid work. Could we do that? How would it work? Well, Pavlina Chernova is one of the proponents. She's director of the economics program at Bard College in the US. She's also author of a new book, The Case for a Job Guarantee.
first, we need to recognize that the market mechanism on its own does not create jobs for all people who need them. Even when the economy is strong, there are still more job seekers than there are job openings, and that is true across the world. There are many reasons for this. Economists now call it a natural rate of unemployment. So there is this consensus that some people simply will not have jobs if relying solely on the market mechanism. Now this, I think, is an idea that needs to be left behind. We don't talk about a natural rate of starvation or natural rate of illiteracy. What we attempt to do is guarantee people education or food.
How would these jobs be discovered? How would they be selected? How would they be allocated?
Yes, there is plenty of work that is not done or needs to be done that is not for commercial return, and that work tends to be neglected. So unemployed people can participate in green work, in care work, in the arts. There are plenty of unemployed musicians and artists who can improve our quality of life. And so it is really a design program to put directly the unemployed to work in the public service sector.
You were suggesting that it should primarily be locally generated. In other words, it's not a central government department that is allocating X number of, I don't know, musicians on street corners, you refer to them, or environmental workers or care workers or nurses or fruit pickers or whatever it might be. It would be at the local level that those jobs might be discovered, or those tasks might be discovered.
Correct. This would be a federal program just like unemployment insurance is, but it will be locally administered. And the reason for this is that local communities have different needs. So from that point of view, the public service will be created from the ground up by people who understand what types of jobs their communities need. But the funding mechanism would be at the federal level.
How much do you pay people?
In my proposal, the wage is at $15 an hour. That may already be too low, but in the United States the minimum wage is very, very low, and so that represents a doubling of the minimum wage.
Yeah.
The idea...
I mean, that would have a huge impact on the economy as a whole, wouldn't it? If you're guaranteeing every single employee, and they can all get jobs, twice the current minimum wage. I mean, it would have a huge inflationary impact, wouldn't it, on the US economy?
Not necessarily inflationary impact. It will raise the floor, no doubt, for a great many people, and that is exactly what we want. We want people not to work in poverty wage jobs and to be able to maintain a basic, decent standard of living. Now, the reason why this is not inflationary is because the program is anti-cyclical. When the very expenditure on the program provides the stimulus for the private sector to recover, and then the private sector creates the jobs that will then soak up or absorb some of those people from the public sector. And so the public expenditure shrinks naturally as the private sector booms. And we see very often that employers can raise the wage to 15 literally overnight without terrible repercussions on employment. In fact, what we know is that raising wages does not cost jobs.
What do you think this would cost? I mean, right now we're looking at potentially, what, 30% unemployment in the US? It's huge. We're in the jaws of a depression across the whole world, and that would be a gigantic program on the back, of course, of huge welfare programs that are being rolled out everywhere.
Well, we will be paying for unemployment one way or another. So the question is, what are we paying for? For the destitution that unemployment brings to communities, for the loss of tax revenue to localities and municipalities, to children getting sicker and so are their parents because of loss of jobs, to the bankruptcies of banks and loans that have defaulted. So the costs are there. Providing employment to the unemployed is actually far less expensive. Instead of paying for food stamps, we're paying for wages. So what would it cost? An estimate of a program that will employ 15 million people would be between 1% and 3% of GDP in the United States. Now that is actually rather small relative to the problem at hand. And it is the kind of stimulus that has very big positive economic and social multipliers. So we are having more bang for the buck, so to speak. And so inflation is not a function of expenditure, it is a function of expenditure beyond full employment, and we are very far away from that level.